If you are working with SharePoint as a knowledge source in Copilot Studio and you're not getting an awesome result, trust me, it is not just you, and I'm here to help you. In this video, we're going to go through how all of this is working, the strengths, the limitations, the things you need to understand, and most importantly, how we can fix this so that you'll get a good result out of these solutions. Let's go through the setup that I'm working with here. And this is a very typical scenario that people are using for SharePoint Knowledge with Copilot Studio, which is connecting to some kind of internal site and a set of documents that have your policies or information that you want your staff to easily be able to get answers from. I've got a fairly basic human resources site here. We've got content on the site, including some messages from our fictional senior leadership team here. Watch out for Irvin, he's going to come back into the picture. And we've got a set of documents here, let me zoom this up a little bit more, that are fairly standard policy documents around leave policies, flexible working, grievance, performance management, and so on. We have got another thing in here, so you'll notice these are all Word documents. I've got a subfolder in here, which has got some resumes from people who've applied for jobs, as well as an Excel spreadsheet here, which has a list of candidates that we're working with. So we're going to go through and have a look at creating an agent that points to this site and see what happens. So start in Copilot Studio, describe your agent to create it. I'm just going to click HR and benefits here. I'm assuming most of you have come to this video because you've already done this part and you want to know why it's not performing very well. So we are going to skip over this part quite quickly. HR helper, we've got some basic instructions and I'm just going to click to create and we'll get right into that knowledge. Now, when you're adding SharePoint as a knowledge, what we want to do is come over to our main site here and grab the URL just to this first level. So we're going to get that piece there up to the level of the human resources. And in fact, the recommendation is to take out the HTTPS. So we've got our agent set up here as a sort of starting point. I'm going to come down in here and say add knowledge and SharePoint. Now you can actually use this browse files. If you want to go straight to the document library here, you could come in here and say, I want my human resources, but you'll see this goes straight to the document or document libraries. If all you want to do is connect to the document library, that is your happy path. However, I also want to connect into the other information that is on that site, including the messages from our leadership and information that's on the actual SharePoint site. So we're going to do that. Always put a description in here. So we're going to call this one Human Resources Site. And then this knowledge source provides information, and you'll see it just sort of puts in a generic thing here, provides information about our human resources policies and messages from our leadership. I'm going to click add and explain why that's important. We're going to come back later to a piece called Generative Orchestration. What is going to happen here is that as you add more knowledge sources, assuming that you've got more than one thing going on, the more you add those descriptions in, that is what enables the AI to understand which knowledge sources it looks at. So this is a good habit that you'll need. So now we have got our basic HR agent with just pointing to that SharePoint site, and we will come in here and give it a question here. How many days annual leave do I get? And one of two things will happen at this point. If you are lucky, and I'm doing this one in real time, you will actually get a response from it straight away. So it's able to answer a question from one of those documents and we're good. However, more than half the time that I do this, I find that if I do what I just did in real time and put that in, I'll get this message. I'm sorry, I'm not sure to help with that. First of all, make sure you're asking a question that's really obviously found in the documents. And then chances are this one is a matter of timing. If your SharePoint site is brand new and just deployed, you're going to have to wait. I actually, in recording this video, built this SharePoint site like a week ago, but when I did it, like building the SharePoint site and creating an agent straight away, it's all too much too quickly. So if your content is new there, give it time to index in the background and also just give it some time. So sometimes that can be a few minutes. Sometimes you really need to go away and come back the next day. First thing to try here. Give it some time, and then hopefully we get back to the good place where we just were. One of the other really important pieces to understand before we go any further is this AI using its own general knowledge, because this can substantially change the results that you get for better or worse. Let me show you. Let's come in here and ask a question that's related to the same topic. What happens if I don't have enough leave? But this is something that isn't really covered in the documents, but that the person might ask. What we've got here, you'll notice the message comes back saying AI generated content may be incorrect instead of a citation to something that we're pointing to. That's your giveaway that this piece is happening. So what we've got here is the large language model, which has been trained on general knowledge out in the world, is using its general knowledge to put together an answer to this question. Importantly, this is not an answer provided in the documents. For almost every use case here where you are creating an agent connected to SharePoint, and these are usually internal things where you're connecting to your organization's information, this is going to be disruptive because you're going to get answers that are not grounded in or related to your organizational knowledge. It also means that it will answer random questions about anything else. How far is it between Melbourne and Sydney, for instance? And it's actually going to give me the answer to that, which is completely off topic for what we're doing here. So we don't want that. All you need to do here, and I would suggest you always do this for these SharePoint use cases, is disable that general knowledge. We'll give it a second. You'll notice that toggle changes, and let's come in here and now ask that question again. What happens if I don't have enough leave? And now that is forcing it, instead of generating an answer, to find the answer, or in this case, own up that it cannot answer that question. Same thing if I ask the question about Melbourne and Sydney, it won't answer that now. So that is always worth doing. So you've got your agent set up, your SharePoint knowledge has had some time to index, you've switched off that general knowledge, everything's working. Let's go through some examples of where it works well, and then I'm going to change these examples up a little bit to show you why it doesn't work. So we start with something, how do I create an About Me post? This is information that is on that Meet the Team site, so you can see it's coming from the SharePoint site. Happy place. How many days leave does a full-time employee get? This is coming from one of those policy documents in the documents library. And again, it's answering it. It's actually drawing on two different documents there and giving me an accurate answer. Who's responsible for injury management at Contoso? You'll see all of these are quite deliberately simple questions. Stay with me. Gives the answer to that as well. Let's ask something about one of those resumes that we had in there. So we had Carlos Rivera was one of the fictional resumes we had in our system, and it's able to answer that as well. Remember, we also had an Excel document in there with a list of candidates. Let's ask about one of the candidates who was on that list and see if it can handle that. And there we go. So far, so good, right? It's able to handle all of these questions. However, they were all very, very carefully crafted to match keywords and language that I know is in the document. I actually had to do a fair bit of testing to find the things that worked that well. This is more likely the experience that you will have. How do I create an About Me post to introduce myself? I haven't used About Me. I've added some extra words. We know that information is there. We can't find it. What is Irvin's message to staff? We can't find it. Remember, I showed you before that that was there. There was a message from him, but it's not written with that exact language. How many days of parental leave does a dad get? Now, this answer is in that leave policy document, but it's not written exactly that way. So it comes back and it says it doesn't specify the exact number of days. It actually does, but it mentions it's something that's there. So you could click through, but it's not providing the answer you want for the user. What skills does Carlos Rivera have? It can still handle that. So, even with a little bit more fluid language, you will sometimes get results that are okay, but more often than not, your experience is more likely these things that we're seeing here. Let's ask something more complicated than who's responsible for injury management. Can an employee choose their own rehabilitation provider, which is probably something that I would ask again. That information is there, but it can't figure it out. And the Excel spreadsheet, there are big limitations with Excel spreadsheet. Please list all the rejected candidates, and it just can't do the thing. If this is your experience, here is why you're having this problem. There are three things here that you need to understand in order to figure out how to improve the situation. The first one is an understanding of what these knowledge sources are actually even doing. And a lot of the questions I see and the problems I see asked about this is because people have a mismatched expectation of what they're trying to achieve and what this part of the technology stack is doing. So we're going to go through that. Then there are two things that are just super shortcuts that you can do. If you want to jump straight to them, go right ahead. The first one is get at least one Microsoft 365 Copilot license in your tenant. It completely changes the way that the SharePoint site and the SharePoint documents are indexed. and you will get a better result. We'll go into that in more depth. And the second one is that there is a new, in preview at the time of recording, generative AI orchestration feature, which determines how your agent decides where to find the answer, and that one makes a big difference as well. I want to take you through all of these though, because I do see a lot of problems with this first one, even though those next two are just toggles that you can just jump to straight away and try if you're confident that you understand what's going on. So what knowledge sources are doing here is something called Retrieval-Augmented generation. Think of this like a super efficient librarian. You are saying, here is our knowledge, here's our library of knowledge, and then when the user asks a question, understand what the intent of that question is, go away and look at the knowledge, all of this information we've given you, find the answer, and then come back and give us the answer, generate the answer in your own words. A couple of really important points here. It is retrieving that information and generating an answer. So if you've got a use case where you're expecting it to actually copy and paste one sentence and give you a page reference or something, it's not doing that. It's got all of this in its virtual brain and it's understanding it, and it's bringing you back in an answer in its own words within the guidance of how you've asked it to do that. The second thing here is that it's not learning per se from your documents. So one of the most common things I see people get tripped up on, oh, I want to give it my organizational style guide and then have it write something in that style. Now, there are other tools in the platform, and let me know if you want to explore this. I'm doing a heap more content. There are other tools in the platform that can achieve that, but this is not it. If you give it knowledge here, it is using that as a reference source to retrieve and generate answers to questions. So if you give it your organizational style guide and say, write me something using that style, it just can't and won't do that. That's not what it's doing. But if you say, what is our policy on using the Oxford comma, little passion area of mine, Oxford commas are good, it will answer that question for you. So just understand the difference there. It is retrieving information and generating answers from your knowledge, not learning from your knowledge and mimicking the style. The other thing is the type of documents that you're working with. The examples that I showed you earlier were using Word documents. This will also work very well with PowerPoint documents and PDFs. It is designed to work on those unstructured text-based documents. Excel, I'm sorry, Excel is problematic here. If you've got a list of things in Excel and you want to retrieve something, again, there are other things. You want to use actions to kind of go and grab something from a list of items. And again, I'll make more videos on actions. I've got one in the, not enough days, I've got one in the works here. But if you're expecting it to be able to sort of reason over it in the same way it can those large blocks of text, the example we saw earlier, sometimes you'll get a result like it pinpointed that one data point. But when I asked it for a list of things or return an array or a list of stuff, it just can't and won't do that. If you want to have a go with Excel, okay, but it is problematic here. The guidance I've had from Microsoft on this is that it's just not supported. So you might be lucky, but please don't expect good results from Excel here. You need to either get your data into a properly structured database like Dataverse to use Knowlege here, or use an action to retrieve data points. And let me know if you want to know more on that. I think everyone needs to understand that part a little bit better. I'm working on it. So the other thing here is that there are limitations on the file size. So if you start off with no Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses, so let's be clear on licensing here. This is the tool we're working with here is Copilot Studio. There's another license, Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is the one where you're paying $30 per user per month and it's sitting inside all of your productivity applications. You do not have to have that to use Copilot Studio. Copilot Studio has its own separate licensing. There's no dependency there. However, if you don't have that, then you are working with a limitation, a very real limitation of working with file sizes only up to 7 meg. Which really doesn't get you very far. Your organizational knowledge is likely to have file sizes that are much bigger than that. And you are also stuck with what's called keyword indexing. In those first two examples I showed you, where I contrived my questions very carefully to use language that was used in those documents and on that site, we were good. But realistically, this is why you're getting a bad result, because it's just working with a very basic way of matching keywords, and you're very limited in the file size. Two important things happen if you have Microsoft 365 Copilot. You only need to have one license in the tenant for this to be enabled. You do not need to license every single user in the organization or everyone is going to use this agent, but just having one in there. So you're paying that $30 a month just once for the whole organization if you're not otherwise using it, then you are going to get this is the single biggest thing you can do to make a huge difference, because two things happen. Firstly, your file size goes up. So it will handle up to, on the bottom there, 512 meg for PDF, PowerPoint, and Word documents. That's a much more substantial document that's going on in there. The other thing is that you will get this enhanced search results, because what happens as soon as you add one of these Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses to the tenant, you get what's called vector indexing on your SharePoint site and SharePoint documents. So vector indexing means, instead of keyword indexing, which is exactly as it sounds, it basically kind of goes through and finds the keywords. It's not quite just literal keywords. It will find slightly similar words, but that's where you're hitting the wall, because it's a very basic type of indexing. Vector indexing is actually assigning numerical values to different words based on their meanings, and then grouping words that have similar meanings together in this sort of spatial index. Essentially, what this means is the difference between keyword indexing. If you are looking at the word apple, it will just find the word apple, admittedly across different contexts. This could be food, could be the software company. But if we're using vector indexing is one of the things you can do to give your agent what's called semantic understanding. And semantic understanding is about understanding the meanings of words and how they relate to each other. So with the Microsoft 365 Copilot license, just one of them in the tenant, your SharePoint site is now being, and all those documents are now being indexed with this vector semantic indexing, which means when somebody asks about Apple, it's not just literally finding that keyword Apple. It's going, well, in my spatial map of words related to Apple, I've also got fruit, and I've got orchard, and I've got iPhone, and I've got innovation, and I've got all of these other things. And so it can start to understand different variations of the word. It can understand synonyms, words that are similar to each other. And it can also just do much better reasoning of understanding what the user is asking and providing the answers. So what this practically means in terms of the difference between keyword and semantic understanding is that keyword questions are basic. So when I showed you that first example and I was going through and giving you those very basic questions, it was able to answer those types of things. Specific terms found in the documents, fairly basic facts and figures, you'll be okay. But that's mostly where it falls over, is you actually want more than that. With the vector indexing and that semantic understanding, you start to get more nuance in the questions. You can start to ask more sophisticated things that might require some reasoning, or that uses language that is different from those literal keywords. So let's have a look at the two things that we can enable in here that really, really change that experience. First thing we're going to do is enable this generative orchestration feature. What this means is that this enables the language model to use AI to understand the intent of the question. Orchestration is about deciding which knowledge source to use and how to find the answer. So this is a more sophisticated way of the agent making those decisions across all of those documents about where to find the right answer. This one is actually just a toggle switch that you can enable. You can see at the time of recording here, this is in preview. I am sometimes nervous about preview features, but to be honest, this is such an uplift that I would seriously consider going ahead with it, because you'll just get such a better result. This is exactly the same agent. This is not the one with Microsoft 365 Copilot in the tenant. This is now the one that I was using before with exactly the same question, but just switching on that more sophisticated way of allowing it to figure out where to find answers in the knowledge. Remember before, what is Irvin's message to staff? It couldn't handle that at all. But what it's doing here, you'll notice even the tracking on the side is a little bit different. It's showing you where it got it from, and it's able to find that. How many days of parental leave does a dad get? You'll remember it sort of said that's not in the document, but it mentions this other thing. And with this generative orchestration turned on, it's actually able to find the answer to those things. That more sophisticated question that it couldn't handle before, it's going to answer that one as well. So even if you can't get that Microsoft 365 Copilot license in your tenant, just switching on this feature right now is going to absolutely completely change the experience of what it is that you're going to be able to get out of this. Let's have a look now at what happens if I ask the question about that Excel spreadsheet again. Does that make any difference? And it's going away, and you'll see there's no output found. It's still really not able to handle that. So Excel is still a very big limitation there. Please don't be disappointed. Well, you are going to be disappointed, but you just can't get a good result from Excel here. So let's have a look here again at another sort of more sophisticated question that isn't provided in the Knowlege, that it couldn't answer before. What are the implications for an employee's role if they cannot return to their original duties after an injury? And then we're going to compare this to see what happens when we've got the Microsoft 365 Copilot license in the tenant. So far, so good. We've switched on the generative orchestration. It's doing a much better job. You can be happy right there. If you've got Microsoft 365 Copilot in the tenant, in the settings menu, this enhanced search results is switched on. If you don't have it, I'd suggest switching off that toggle. It won't work anyway, but we've got this switched on. So I'm going to ask that same more sophisticated question, which it was able to answer just with the generative orchestration switched on. But I want you to look at the difference here when we've got that vector indexing, that semantic understanding at work in the quality of the two answers. There's nothing else different between these two agents. They're pointing at the same documents. They've got the same instructions, but side by side here, this is the experience of having the Microsoft 365 Copilot agent in the tenant with the vector indexing on the right and without on the left. So you'll see it's working on the left, but look at the difference in the sort of the understanding and the sophistication and the quality of the answer there. So these two things combined, that generative orchestration combined with having one Microsoft 365 Copilot, is giving you a better answer. Let's take another example here. So what options are available if an employee needs to take time off during a family emergency? Just using the keyword indexing with that orchestration going on in there, it is able to find the answer. So it can go through and say, this is how many days leave. It can be deducted from your sick or carer's leave balance. And then you've got unpaid carer's leave. Now that's all correct, but it is missing something because there are other types of leave that are relevant here. And with that vector indexing, that greater level of semantic understanding, it's also picking up that compassionate leave might be in play here, and that's a factor. So you'll just see that uplift. I really think that if you are working with this technology and you're trying to get those better answers, it is well worth considering. Here's another example here. This is a travel and leave policy where we've actually got two versions of the same document. This is danger zone for anything here, as if you're working with SharePoint documents, have a good content management strategy. Multiple versions of the same content are confusing for the AI to figure out. But again, watch the difference here. Same document, same experience. How much can I spend on accommodation in Sydney? So it's actually going to go out and try to find that. And you'll see it comes back with both because it's confused, right? There's travel expenses policy version 2 and version 3. And it says that the standard accommodation charge isn't specified, which actually it is. But there's some confusion there about where that is in the policy. Exactly the same thing with that vector semantic understanding running over it, and it's actually coming back with the correct answer from the version 3 of the policy, the more recent version of the policy. I would still not recommend having multiple versions of things, but again, it's much more able to understand what's going on and how to work with that. So here is how to fix your poor performance with SharePoint as a knowledge source. Number one, if you possibly can, get just one license for Microsoft 365 Copilot in your tenant. If everyone's got it, great, but you don't need that. Just one will do the trick. Secondly, switch on that generative AI orchestration feature with or without the Microsoft 365 Copilot. You will definitely get a much better response, even though it's in preview. I would highly recommend considering that. Understand the file types and the sizes so that you're not asking it questions of documents where it's only reading the first part of the document if you've got massive documents in there. Understand the difference between structured and unstructured data. Excel is trying to behave like structured data. This knowledge source is going to work very well on those documents or properly structured database. Excel is not a database. It just doesn't fit. And please don't give up. This improves and changes very quickly. If you tried this a year ago, if you tried this even, 2 or 3 months ago, go back in and have another go. This technology is as bad as it's ever going to be. It's changing and improving every day. Keep going with it. Try these things. Let me know how you go and what other questions you have. Plenty more content to come. Thank you for watching as always.